PSG 2, Arsenal 1. PSG go through to the final 3-1 on aggregate. Arsenal knocked out Trophyless again, and it's been 1,377 days since Arsenal last won a trophy. Bigger fish to fry, they said to Man United fans last season when they won an FA Cup. But look, you want to win trophies, Arsenal. That's what football's about. And you know what? I want to banter Arsenal and I want to laugh at Arsenal. But we are actually going to have some proper talk and some proper analysis on here and actually talk about the game, because over the two legs, it wasn't like Arsenal were dominated. Arsenal played some all right football. They were good in the first phase. They were good in the second phase. But knockout football is about individual moments and individual quality. That's why Real Madrid, so many times when they haven't even been at their best, have won the Champions League. And even if the other team has played better football than them, because Real Madrid, in the big moments, they have the big players that produce the big moments of quality. And I look at Arsenal, I look at PSG today. Kvaratskhelia, Desiree Doué, Dembele and Barcola versus Saka, fantastic player, but then Trossard, he's nowhere near that level. Martinelli, he's nowhere near them. Marino's playing out of position, and that was the big difference today. We're going to have a conversation about Arsenal and their problems, and we're going to properly analyse the game, but thank you, PSG. Thank you, PSG. I might have... This match reaction is going out late because I might have just spent like the last 30 minutes winding Arsenal fans up on Twitter and sending my friends messages that support Arsenal. I'm not going to lie. We're going to talk about the match. And I know Man United is 16th. Everyone's going to be like, shut the F up, Alice. But look, football is about giving out a bit of banter. You've got to give out a bit of banter when a rival loses. You know, I'll sit here and I'll praise Arsenal when they're good. I don't even think Arsenal were bad today. I'll give you proper analysis on here, but I have to say I was enjoying giving out some banter on Twitter earlier today. But look, XG-wise, you know, underlying numbers-wise, if Arsenal had better attackers, they would have probably gone through, and I think that is correct. Had Arsenal had Victor Gyökeres starting up top over the two legs, I think Arsenal could very much be in a Champions League final, but they didn't. Arsenal had the January window to invest. They had the Kai Havertz injury. They had Bukayo Saka out injured, and Arsenal did not invest. And you can't really blame Arteta for that. I think it would be unfair for Arsenal fans to beat Arteta out. I think today wasn't on Arteta. I do think you could have brought Wanyeri on for Odegaard. You were lacking that quality. What? You know, you need something new. Give PSG something new to think about. Maybe just give Wanyeri 15 minutes. But I thought, other than that, I can't really criticise Arteta, because I think he set up Arsenal well. I think Arsenal played some decent stuff, but look, they had two chances in the first 10 minutes to make it 1-1 on aggregate. They didn't. Martinelli had a chance. Declan Rice had a header. Saka had that open goal, although it was coming in for him fast. You know, Partey probably could have done better for the Hakimi goal. You know, you can't... For me, it's not on Arteta. I'm not going to sit here and be like, Arsenal should sack Arteta, because I don't think Arsenal were bad. I thought Arsenal were decent across the two legs. 3-1 makes it look like PSG were a lot more dominant than they were. It was just knockout football. Champions League football is about moments, individual quality. And in the bigger moments, PSG took their chances. You know, it's not about possession. It's not about who plays the prettiest football. It's not about who controls the game. It's not about who's better 90% of the game. It's what you do in those moments. And when you have Kvaratskhelia, Dembele, Barcola, that is the difference. You know, Arsenal, you know, Martinelli doesn't step up in these big games. Odegaard doesn't step up in these big games. Saka's the one that you go to, but it's just Saka. You know, your defence is fine, your midfield is fine, but it's that front line. I think Arsenal, you know, 5.11 XG to PSG's 3 across two legs and lost 3-1. It's quality. You look at the Newcastle semi-final in the Carabao Cup. Yeah? Newcastle have Isak and Gordon. You know, I don't think you had Saka available then. Newcastle defended well, but they had the quality to make it count. And that's what's let Arsenal down. How many draws have Arsenal had this season? A ridiculous amount. Saka's the only guy I look at as a threat. I think Ben White being out the season has been a big blow. Havertz being out, big blow. Of course, the injuries. Ben White, Calafiore would bring some more attacking threat. But Arsenal know what they need to do in the summer. They've got Andrea Berta coming in. You need a striker, you need a winger, you maybe need a creative player. I think Subamende is going to come in. So let's talk about Arsenal. Because while Arteta isn't winning trophies, Arsenal are second in the Premier League. Other than this season, they had challenged for the Premier League the last 2 years, and they had got into a Champions League semi-final. So as much as I have enjoyed bantering Arsenal online, as much as I have enjoyed bantering Arsenal on Twitter, look, realistically, if Man United win the Europa League, they haven't had a better season than Arsenal. I'll admit that as a Man United fan. We're 15th, 16th in the Premier League. I just like to banter Arsenal. I like to say, 10 Olds won 2 trophies, Arteta's won 1. You know, Arteta isn't winning trophies, but Arteta has done a good job of Arsenal. There's progress. He's building something. You're up there. a couple top class players who can produce in individual moments, and I think Arteta will win trophies. I think Arteta not winning trophies isn't on Arteta. This is coming as a Man United fan. Arteta not winning trophies is on the people above Arteta for not giving him those moments players, that individual quality. And Andrea Berta is going to come in when it most matters. So as much as I like saying, oh, Ten Hag's won more trophies than Arteta, Ten Hag wasn't better than Arteta. He's not done a better job than Arteta. As much as I like to say, oh, Man United might win a trophy this season and Arsenal haven't, and give it a bit of banter, Arsenal have had a better season than Man United. But let's talk about this in more detail. Let's talk about everything. Arsenal's approach wasn't the issue. I think Arteta's system functioned, but execution fell short. I think the only criticism I would give is maybe how reliant Arteta is on putting crosses in and going out wide. Could they have done a bit more in the middle? I thought Arsenal had dominant large spells, but they lacked a finisher. Saka, I thought was probably the biggest threat. I don't think Saka had his best game today, but over the two legs, he was probably the biggest threat for Arsenal. I think, Martinelli had decent moments, but Martinelli and Trossard, when you compare that to Kvaratskhelia, Desiree Doué and Dembele, there's a level there. Saka's in that level, but there's a level there. Martin Odegaard, fantastic last season, was unbelievable last season, underwhelming, ghosting in some of Arsenal's biggest games again. In fact, I've got Odegaard's stats here. Across the two legs, 0.16 expected assists. Zero's dribble completed, zero. Zero shots on target, nothing. Ghosted. 10 times possession lost, 4 times possession lost. Man United are crap. I'm a Man United fan. We're absolutely crap. But you know how we get goals and we don't score many goals? Bruno Fernandes does something out of nowhere, puts in a fantastic ball, fantastic pass, fantastic shot. He scored 2 versus Bilbao. He's involved in everything. Arsenal need a player like that when everybody around him is crap, will step up. And that's why United is so lucky with Bruno Fernandes, because he can step up when everyone's around him crap. Odegaard reminds me of Foden in the sense of they're very reliant on the people around them, the systems, the combinations. And I get that. But you need to also show individual brilliance. Jude Bellingham, people might not like him, but he will show that individual brilliance. That's why Real Madrid have won games in the Champions League when they've not been great. Arsenal showed that, that they were the better team versus Real Madrid. And I think for bits of the game, they played better than PSG. But it's in those individual moments you've got to step up. And this is what I said in regards to my notes. Odegaard's drop was undeniable. I thought he was fantastic last season. I think, obviously, the combinations with Saka and Ben White and Odegaard last season worked really well. Ben White's been injured. Saka's been injured. But one pass in the opening 22 minutes, 1 out of 6 duels won. That's not good enough. And this was in the first leg. He made 1 pass in the first 22 minutes. Arsenal needs someone that's going to take risks. And the one thing I'll say to Arsenal is sometimes they follow instructions too much. Arteta wants to play like this, this, and this, and do this, this, and this, that it can become predictable. It can become slow. Sometimes just take that risk. That's what Bruno does at Man United, and that's what Odegaard needs to do. People don't like Salah. People say Salah, he's a stat padder. He gets goals and assists, but doesn't do this, doesn't do that. But Salah wins games. You need players that just win games. Odegaard can do this and pretty that, but you need game winners. I think Partey is good on the ball, but I think his mistake led to Hakimi goal. I think he sometimes is a defensive liability in these big games, which also didn't help Arsenal. It's not just on Odegaard and players stepping up. Lewis Skelly, I love Lewis Skelly. I think he's a fantastic player, but I think today his lack of experience showed. I thought Marino did all right, but he wasn't always in the box when he was needed in the box. I think he did well outside the box, and that's because he's not a striker. You can't blame Marino. But I do think Subamende coming in for Thomas Partey, a left winger coming in, a striker coming in, Arsenal in a very good place, potentially even someone to challenge Martin Odegaard, who I think could get back to his best next season with a pre-season. Something's not right there, and you don't just become a bad player overnight, but he's significantly underwhelming. So let's continue into some other points. I don't think Arsenal respond well to setbacks, and I've said this for months. They're elite at controlling games, but not chasing them. There's so many times where Arsenal have maybe been 1-0 up in a game and a bad penalty decision's gone against them, or they've got a red card and it's been 1-1, and they're not able to make it 2-1. It's like that setback of going down to 10 men or the ref decision not going their way impacts them, and they've not been able to go and win that game. Whereas Liverpool, earlier in the season, obviously they dropped off a bit because they knew they'd won the league. But when they had those setbacks, they found ways. When they went behind, they found ways. And I don't know if that's because Arsenal lack game breakers. I don't know if it's a mentality thing. But I find that Arsenal don't respond to setbacks as well as other teams. You look at sort of comebacks in football. Inter Milan and Barcelona, they both came back. I feel like Arsenal have lacked that this season. Liverpool have come back from times behind. Even Manchester United were crap. But look at us versus Lyon. You know, Arsenal sometimes don't respond from setbacks. And I think a full year without recruiting a forward has massively cost them. I think attackers haven't been the most reliable this season. And I think, to be honest, Arsenal needs some fresh leg. I think the attack is, you're brilliant in the first phase, you're brilliant in the second phase. You have the best defensive record in the Premier League. Arsenal have the best defence in the Premier League. Arsenal off the ball are arguably the best team in Europe. And Arsenal in the first and second phase are fantastic, but Arsenal in the final phase, they lack. And my one biggest criticism of Arteta today was, why couldn't Wanyeri get 15 minutes? Needed a spark, you needed something different. And that's my biggest criticism. So going into what Arsenal need, top level striker, Gyökeres. Sesko's raw. I think Gyökeres is what you need over Sesko. Williams, maybe left wing. I think Williams is still a little bit overrated, Nico Williams, but Nico Williams, Gittins type left winger. You could go for Semenyo, maybe. Creative midfielder. I think a Morgan Rogers would be fantastic for Arsenal. I don't think he's for sale. But I think with Andrea Berta's arrival coming in, he likes big signings. And what Arsenal need is a big attacking revamp. He's exactly what Arsenal need. Arsenal need to wake up and they need to go and they need to bring in that top striker. Like, the truth about Arsenal is you're a good team. Off the ball, best team in Europe. Best team in the world off the ball. Well coached. You're a good team. But to be a great team, you need individuals. It's not about who's the best coach, who plays the better football. You need those individuals. And that's what a Gyökeres could do. Maybe a Morgan Rogers, maybe an Mbeumo. That's what you need. You need that individual brilliance. Rodrigo, Madrid want to sell him. He can play on the left. Look at that. Arteta should stay. The system does need a bit of flexibility, but it's the players. Arsenal can be proud of the progress. They can be proud of the steps they've taken, but it's another trophyless season for Arsenal. And that's a letdown for Arsenal fans because Arsenal had such high hopes going into the season, but they didn't do enough in the transfer window in 2024 and in January. They should have brought a striker in. I want to talk about PSG. I just want to give credit to PSG. They were ruthless. They were composed. They took early leads in both games. They defended well when needed. And the Inter versus PSG final is set. Both teams are physical, dangerous, thrive in transitions. I'm excited for that. But PSG had the brilliance. Hakimi, fantastic today. João Neves, unbelievable on the ball. Kvaratskhelia, I got stick for this. I did a live stream back in December, and a Man United fan commented on my live stream, Alice, no, I know it's never going to happen, but who would you rather see at Man United, Kvaratskhelia or Vinicius? And I said I would take Kvaratskhelia over Vinicius at Manchester United any day of the week. He's harder working, and I think he's a better player. And I said that in December. He was never going to come to Man United, but I said that in December. And I still believe that. I think Kvaratskhelia was unbelievable today. Fantastic. João Neves, fantastic. Watching João Neves and Pedri in these semi-finals is so nice on the eye. But look at Kvaratskhelia, 21 duels contested, 9-1, 6 tackles, 3 dribbles. He never stops working. I've always said Kvaratskhelia, I think, is one of the best wingers in football. I think, for me, he's my favourite winger in football right now. World football right now. I would have done anything to have him at Man United. Liverpool were interested in him, but he went to PSG. He was everywhere. He helped out Nuno when he got booked, and Nuno Mendes did very well with the booking, obviously having to deal with Saka. He's fantastic. Anyway, Arsenal fans or PSG fans or neutral fans, let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching. Bye.